Thank you so much for joining us tonight. If you were here last week, you know that this is so informative and it's a really, really important conversation starter. As Alex had said, please use discretion if you have any of the younger people watching, and we're going to dive into some pretty serious and really important subject matter. And I had an opportunity to talk to some of the panelists before we got started. So I am just honored to be part of this, and I'm honored to lead such strong and empowering and inspirational women. At the end, we will have a brief Q&A, so hold your questions to the end, and I'm going to go ahead and ask for those much later in the presentation, but you can find the area where it says Q&A to write some of your questions. Without further ado, I think it's time to get started. Dr. Isabel is going to start her presentation, and then we will join in as the panel.
I'll just give you a quick overview on Salt Light Coalition for those of you who don't know us. We are an organization that provides job training for survivors of trafficking here in Chicago. We focus on trauma first because we believe that women cannot be successful unless they address their trauma. So we do that by providing a 6-month program where they're healing, and we focus on the individual as a holistic being. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later, but then we enter another 6-month phase where women go through a workforce development program. We remove all barriers to participation by providing CTA cards and stipends to the women, and most of our programming is done through volunteers. So at the end, if you like what you hear, I just ask that you come and volunteer with us, that you be part of this organization, that you come back for more conversations. But I think that we should start by first talking about what is trauma.
So I just want to start, that word trauma carries a range of different meanings. And I'd love to hear from you, Marcella, from a psychiatry perspective. What is trauma?
Sure. In medicine, we see trauma as a wound. For example, you have a physical injury. If not treated properly, it will lead to a physical wound. And the same thing can apply to emotional injuries. If not addressed properly, they will turn into emotional wounds, invisible scars. And what kind of injuries, what kind of assaults are we talking about here? It can be really anything, any negative experience, from rape to domestic violence, physical assault, natural disasters like the one we are experiencing now with COVID-19, severe illness, injury, the death of a loved one, witnessing an act of violence, emotional neglect. For example, if you were raised by detached parents, if you're exposed to separation from your parents. So those insults sometimes manifest as this overwhelming stress that exceeds our ability to cope.
And what about psychotherapy, Jasmine? Is trauma perceived any differently?
No, I would absolutely agree with everything that Marcella said. We think of trauma as being kind of those lasting effects that impact one's kind of mental, physical, social, spiritual functioning and well-being that just comes from witnessing something that is physically or emotionally harmful or life-threatening, of course, experiencing it. In the world of counseling and psychotherapy, we feel that like what actually happened is not necessarily as important as what the trauma ends up meaning to the individual. So definitely understand that core beliefs can be altered, assumptions can be altered, which just results in kind of feeling unsafe, impacts your perception of others, your sense of fairness, your sense of purpose, and your future dreams. So whenever I have a client come into my office, people who've survived trauma don't always present to therapy wanting to address trauma, but I just ask, is there anything that's ever happened to you that when you look back at it, you feel that you shouldn't have gone through that? And I think that's kind of a starting point for thinking about what constitutes trauma.
Why are some people affected so differently when it comes to trauma? You know, you could have two people and they could experience the same type of event, and one is really affected where the other, it may not bother that person. And why is that, Marcella?
It has to do with your pre-morbid personality, what kind of life experiences you've had growing up, positive, negative memories that you've built along the years, what kind of family you come from, exposures, access to resources, education, your support systems, whether or not you have protective factors, for example, religion, community, an intact family, employment, financial security. All these things will help shape your temperament, your personality, your defenses, and how you cope with stress and adversity, and what kind of resilience you have.
Okay, now I'm going to direct some of my questions to the survivors. Melinda, I'm going to start with you. You've felt trauma firsthand. If you had to explain it in your own words, how would you describe it, and what did that look like for you?
So I would say that trauma for me is, I want to say, a distressing or a disturbing experience, right? Something that I have to work on addressing every day to heal, right? I have a variety of things that I went through in my lifetime, things that I've experienced that conditioned me in my mind that I was resilient. At the time that the traumas occurred for me, I kind of remained untouched by it, right? So I experienced childhood domestic violence, right, with my family, child molestation. And I was conditioned very young that that was just how relationships were, right? So when I got older and I started seeking out being in a relationship, those were the kind of men that, I built relationships with. So from my teenage years and pretty much for the rest of my life, until I finally started to recover, I was in domestic violence relationships. I chose men who would beat me daily, verbally and emotionally abuse me. And I had a lot of family dysfunction right in the process of my life. My grandmother passed, and I found her, passed away. When I woke up, we shared a room together. And there was just a lot of things that happened to me as a child that I took on with me until my adult life, right? And at a point in my life, I just lost myself and I dove right into my drug addiction. And through my drug addiction, a lot of really terrible things happened to me. I lost my children. I was raped, robbed, beat up on the streets. I suffered severe homelessness. I was sold, trafficked, and I conditioned myself to believe that this was just the way that life was, right? That this was as good as it was gonna get for me. And I constantly detached from society. I was at a point in my life when I finally did decide to get clean, because getting clean was easier than having to address all these things that's happened to me that I struggled when I finally would go to sleep. I had severe nightmares. And it took me 1.5 years into my recovery I used to sleep with the blanket completely like wrapped around me and tucked in around me from a child on up. So, I could feel if somebody was trying to touch me. And it took me 1.5 years into my recovery to break that from happening, right? And that's what trauma looked like for me, was many things that I conditioned myself and believed that that was okay, right?
Thank you so much for sharing that with us. Christine, what did trauma look like for you?
I consider trauma to be a life-threatening experience, right? We all have our ups and downs, but for something to really, get your adrenaline to surge and make your heart beat fast and to sweat, we all have different tolerances for things. So I guess depends on the individual. But for me, I was trafficked when I was 15. So back then it was absolutely jarring, and I'd lost my father early on, and I had some somewhat traumatic events, but the first time I experienced trauma, it was all those things. And then because, kind of as a side effect of that trauma, I put myself in situations where I didn't really have to deal with society. And so those vulnerable, high risk situations brought on more trauma. And the human body is just really amazing. Our ability to adapt to pretty much anything is amazing. So what one person would consider to be traumatic became normal to me. It became familiar. I was used to being, around bullets flying all over the place because I was only outside at night, and everyone knows nothing good happens after 2 a.m. in Chicago. So, I was so ashamed, and I thought that it was my fault because I would replay these things over in my head over and over. And I would say, if I had only jumped out of the car at that red light, or if I had only, ran for the door when he reached for his bag. And so I started to blame myself for these things. And so you learn how to focus, strangely, and you learn how to operate under these abnormal situations that have become your normal. And so I think my answer is that, to me, trauma became familiar. And as I went through the transition from that lifestyle to the life I live now, Salt and Light had to teach me how to get comfortable with daylight. I know it sounds strange, but when you live for so long with a mentality that's bare survival, it's jarring just to have goals. And, anything, I could go through the worst experience in the world and not shed a tear. I was hard as a rock. I mean, nothing really fazed me. But when something good happened to me, I burst into tears. And it only recently has that finally, it's only recently started to subside. For the longest time, anytime somebody would make me feel really good, I would start crying. When I would talk about negative things, just the whole feeling of getting those things out and realizing that they're not happening anymore caused, the floodgates opened. And so trauma did to me, it made me become accustomed to that lifestyle.
Jasmine, I have a question for you. Is substance abuse always a coping mechanism, in your opinion?
No, so I think it is commonly seen as a coping mechanism. I wouldn't say it always is seen kind of in conjunction with trauma. But yeah, when you think of that intersectionality, a lot of the symptoms and just kind of effects of experiencing trauma, that sense of detachment and the numbness, and then on the other side of it, just being completely overwhelmed by your emotions and feeling too much and not enough and feeling flooded. Sometimes substance use can be seen as a way to kind of medicate on either end of the spectrum, whether it's too much or too little. And then I think also we see kind of substance use as leading towards trauma, or sometimes putting individuals in the pathway of further trauma and re-traumatization. Sometimes the lifestyle that can go along with substance use, or things that happen when someone's under the influence, can result in further trauma. So I do think there is for sure an intersectionality, and the two are really connected, but I wouldn't say it's always used as a coping mechanism, but frequently.
Marcella, why do we see things like dissociation or amnesia happening when it comes to trauma?
It's a way that we develop to forget that these things are happening to us. We kind of see things, feel things from a different perspective, from a third person view, and this detachment is helpful to process our feelings.
And I have one more question before we start to move on. I want to talk about PTSD, and I know we can have a full hour talking about that and how to cope with that. But tell us a little bit about their trauma and PTSD, and I would assume it's a lifelong journey. Jasmine.
Yeah, absolutely. And, when you look at the DSM, there are certain criteria that categorize, post-traumatic stress disorder. And there is a differentiation, as Christine mentioned, between some of the normative stress reactions that we all go through in response to kind of unforeseen or unpredictable events in our lives. And then there are the stress reactions that are long-standing, that last, for a period that's, longer than 3 months, and it really just becomes becomes kind of entrenched in our way of life. And so, recovery is a process. It's a process that we live the rest of our lives. And so certainly, while there is always the potential of kind of re-experiencing some of those stress reactions, when individuals get a really good kind of system of coping strategies and a support system, PTSD is absolutely something that can be managed to a degree where there's not a daily experience of those stress reactions, though of course we can't unlive what we've lived in our lives and the impact that it's had on us.
I also want to make it a point that, nothing is wrong with you if you suffer from PTSD. I know that there's things that happen in everyone's lives and we all deal with trauma, and sometimes those things come back and visit us later in life. Marcella, can you talk about having that guilt for still feeling badly about something that may have happened when we were children?
Yeah, the guilt and the shame are real, are highly prevalent, are at the core of the issues of the person who is a victim of trauma, who has PTSD. And these are distorted cognitions. This is a distorted lens. It's not your fault. You have to stop blaming yourself. It wasn't anything that you did, anything you didn't do. You are a victim. And this distortion needs to change. And one very effective way to change it is through psychotherapy, meeting with someone regularly, about once a week or so, someone who is highly trained in mental health, who has a non-judgmental attitude, who will be able to identify those distortions, how you've been coping with them, and how you can develop healthier ways to cope with them.
Thank you. Now let's talk about overcoming trauma. Isabel, can you tell me a little bit about Salt and Light's model to helping people overcome that intense trauma?
Of course. So I think that before talking about overcoming trauma, we have to define the individual that we are trying to help overcome trauma. And usually how other organizations will tackle that is that they approach the individual as a biopsychosocial individual. So that means that they may provide food, for example, addressing the biological component. Or they might provide psychotherapy to address the psychological component. Or sometimes it'll be drugs, medicine for the biological component as well. The social component, maybe they'll create a strong community, right? What makes us different is that we see the individual as having one more facet, and that is the spiritual facet. So when we approach any woman at Salt and Light Coalition, we see them with biological needs, psychological needs, social needs, and spiritual needs. And then there's something called a socio-ecological model for resilience, which basically can predict whether somebody's going to develop resilience. And we place them at the middle of that model, and we provide everything that they need to create the outcome. So we provide them with not like certain beliefs, right? A growth mindset, for example, that they can do anything. We provide them with the identity that they can do anything. And then sometimes faith will help them rebuild their narrative as well if they want to acquire those beliefs. And then we move on to kind of the family. We can't really change their families, but we can provide a very close, knit community that functions as a family. So I feel like if you look at Myra Sotomayor, who's a psychotherapist, for example, and Michelle, and I, when I can be there, we're a very close-knit family. And we tell each thriver that this is a long-term thing, that we are family. And we do that on purpose because we want them to have that support. And then outside of that, we have a very strong community of women who are showing up every day, our volunteers, who are empowering them every day. So we're making sure that we're putting everything in place to create resilience, correct? So in phase one, we address the biological first, right? We ask them to engage in consistent exercise. Consistent exercise will bring serotonin to your brain, will bring joy, right? We teach them about a healthy nutrition. Why? Because there's a new field of nutritional psychiatry that talks about the gut-body, the gut-mind connection. So what you eat is going to impact your mental health. And then we treat the biological and the psychological individual through trauma-sensitive yoga. What does that mean? Well, a lot of the women who have been trafficked, think that their bodies is no longer safe. So they disassociate. Like Melinda said, she would wrap herself around the blanket to feel safe, right? Because that body is not safe anymore. But through the trauma sensitive yoga, women are able to reclaim their bodies, right? To see that, wait a minute, I can be safe in my body again. We also create self-awareness for their psychology. So every day they come in, the first thing we do is that we actually talk about something that day. It could be the lies that you tell yourself. So what are the lies that you're telling yourself this week? You're going to take notes of all the lies. They get homework. What are you telling yourself? And then we talk about what are the consequences of telling yourself some lies. So if you believe that you're not able to do things, guess what? Your brain is being primed for that. So when you get out in the world, are you going to see the opportunities? No, because your brain is not even going to identify, because you don't think that it's even possible for you. We provide a strong community, like I said before, of not only the employees, but of the community that comes and volunteers. And we provide spirituality. So I think that one of the key things that we do is this piece. And I believe that it is instrumental in rewriting people's narratives, right? One of the keys to becoming resilient, one of the keys for post-traumatic growth is being able to rewrite your narrative to gain meaning. And spirituality is doing that for these women, right? You believe that something happened to you because there is a greater good, because there is a lesson, right? Because God wants you to do something. In phase 2, we continue with workforce development, but we actually start by building identity. So we want women to know that they can be anything they want. Maybe they haven't been yet what they want to be, but whatever they want to be, it is possible. And you start that just by personal branding, by branding who you are to the world. You tell people who you are, right? You talk in a particular way, you dress in a particular way, and we provide life coaching to help them have goals and fulfill those goals so that they can get to be the woman that they want to be. We provide mentorship as a part of another part of a component of community. And finally, we provide training so that they can finally become successful in the workplace. So once we do that, we end up placing about 90% of our participants, and we see an average drop of 23% in their anxiety scores and 20% in their depression scores. But I think that the best people to talk about overcoming trauma would probably be Marcella, Jasmine, and Melinda and Christine. So I'll leave it up to you.
Jasmine, I have a question for you. What are your views on Salt and Light's model? What do you feel about how it works and how it would work into helping trauma?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think the holistic nature of the program, that it does take into account bio, psychosocial, and adds in the spiritual, is really in line with the areas of support that survivors of trauma can benefit from. We know that trauma can lead individuals to see themselves as incompetent or damaged, kind of feel the world as unsafe and unpredictable. There's often alienation, so I especially love the way that Salt and Light really builds community. But I do, I think what Salt and Light does that is really important, an important point around building community is first establishing that safety. And so, although, smiling faces saying they're there to support you and that they've got your back is wonderful. If you're someone who in life, sometimes those individuals have also wronged you, there's kind of a healthy amount of suspicion maybe. And so building a trusting environment, just the consistency that the Salt and Light team provides, they show that they're dependable. They create a space for open and compassionate communication, which is really important. And they set clear boundaries that I think help the thrivers know in a really good way. How do I kind of use this support system, and then also build supports outside of this network too. So yeah, I think it's a beautiful model, and making meaning, as Isabel said, is the missing piece that some other programs don't touch on.
Marcella, many thrivers see a psychiatrist and a psychotherapist. Why is that?
The treatment for trauma, PTSD, or any traumatic experience is quite complex because it involves important things on each domain: bio, psychosocial, spiritual. Sometimes a psychotherapist is able to process those feelings, those emotions through individual or group therapy. But sometimes the biological component is so prominent, the association, the comorbidity with other psychiatric illnesses such as depression, anxiety, panic disorder, use of alcohol and substances. Sometimes that is so important that we need to intervene with medications. So a psychiatrist is a medical doctor. We go to medical school, therefore we have the ability to prescribe medications. Psychiatrists can also do psychotherapy. A lot of us are fully trained in psychotherapy. So sometimes the treatment is concentrated in one person, but sometimes we split the treatment between a psychiatrist to manage the medication piece and a psychotherapist for individual or group therapy.
Melinda, I'm going to go to you now. You've experienced a lot of trauma in your life, and you've overcome so much. Can you tell us how Salt and Light has helped you come through the other side?
Yes, I can. So before I can explain to you how Salt and Light helped me, I need to kind of explain where my mindset was at when I walked in the door and I met the team. So at that time, I was so willing to do whatever it took, right, to undo everything that I've learned in my life. I wanted to be anything else in life other than the person that I was before I got clean. And Salt and Light really helped me have that connection piece, and they made me feel comfortable in my own skin. They conditioned me to believe daily that I was perfect just the way I was every time I walked in the door. And it was consistent, right? I knew that they were going to always be there for me. I did a lot of things. I talked to a lot of people, right? My God, Salt and Light really helped me find my voice, if that makes sense. Isabel's a stickler, she is. She's got a good way of keeping us in compliance, and I love her for it. She showed me what sisterhood was like, what women empowerment was like. She taught me that women heal women, which was something that I never believed in before because I hated women. I hated women because they were my competition for so long. So I never knew what it was like to make a friend. And at the time when I walked in the door at Salt and Light, I had kind of detached from everybody that I thought was my friend because the streets don't love you. And I wanted to find my light no matter what. So I let everybody go. And I knew that it was detrimental to my healing and my recovery. And man, Isabel, I want to say she prayed me into the place that I am now all the time. So I want to thank Salt and Light for that.
I think it's one of the beautiful and unique things about Salt and Light. They have many unique things, but the faith aspect and bringing that perspective in, I think, is just one of the most wonderful things. And it's just so apparent when you speak. God was with you with that, and thank you for sharing. Christine, my next question is for you. If you had to pick one single aspect that helped you heal from Salt and Light, what would that be?
Well, I think that answer's pretty obvious for me. I have been through several different programs that offer that whole biopsycho social model, and none of them worked for very long. Sometimes I would, do well for a little while, but it was the addition of the spiritual component that changed everything. And I know there's a lot of people out there that don't really grasp the whole spiritual concept and maybe don't agree with it, but you cannot argue with these results. The bottom line is it's changing our lives. And so that was definitely the one piece that meant the most to me and changed the most. Adding that changed my way of thinking altogether. And so that's exactly what I needed, because my old way of thinking just wasn't working.
And community is a big part when it comes to Salt and Light's model. This question is for both Melinda and Christine. How did you guys feel when they would bring community in and the people of the community to help you and the volunteers? You know, was it hard for you to trust them? Was it hard for you to buy into the model? Tell me a little bit about that aspect. We'll start with Christine.
Well, for me, I was kind of taken aback by the fact that there's all these talented, successful, brilliant women who are coming in and they're telling me, you can live a better life, you can do it. And after, I mean, when I walked in there, I just wanted normalcy. I just wanted to, you know, just to live a normal life. But after hearing for so long, you can do this, you can be whatever you want to be, you can change the freaking world if you want to, I started to believe it. And so that, right around the beginning of the second phase, was when the sense of community just made me so ambitious. And even here now, years later, that's still with me. And so that sense of community was one of the core components of Salt and Light, because, you know, Melinda touched on the fact that, you know, about women being enemies, and that's very, very common in that lifestyle. And then there's the opposite extreme where everyone is an enemy. And then there's the men are the enemy. And there's the one thing that is consistent is that it's not one big community when you're living this kind of lifestyle. And we learned how to transition and learn how to trust people. That was a big part of it. Learning how to trust people and learning how we're finally really accepting that everyone has your best intentions at heart. Everyone that you're dealing with right now in Salt and Light is there to help you. And I mean, if all these people believe in me, maybe they're right. So.
And Melinda, same question. How did you feel about the community, that sense of community and volunteers coming in and helping you?
The consistent flow of all these positive, beautiful spiritual souls that would come together every week and try to help guide us on this journey was remarkable to me, because I never had that. I never had anybody really show up for me and tell me that I could be anything else. I just assumed that, you know, I was going to be that person forever. And I really connected. I got to connect with a lot of the volunteers, and because they did so much for me that I never done before. Like, we got our hair and our makeup done, and we took photo shoots, and they taught us how to dress, and they did all these things that my mother never even did with me. And as well as spiritually guiding me and helping me build a deeper connection with my higher power, who is a part of my everyday journey. You know, and I owe that relationship to Salt and Light, because I found God in a cell, right? I found God in a cell, but I didn't know God, and I did not have a relationship with God because nobody ever taught me what that was, but I knew that there was something bigger than me. There had to be something bigger than me, and somebody that this had to happen for a reason. There had to be a reason why I went through these things. I had to believe that, because I wanted to go on in life, wishing and hoping that my whole life wasn't a lie, right? I had to believe that there was something bigger than me, and I had to get out of the driver's seat, because I had to surrender. I had to surrender everything that I knew and accept that there was something bigger than me. And Salt and Light and the volunteers helped me believe in something bigger than me, because he wouldn't have placed all these people in my life that couldn't have been true, you know? All these people coming into my life, rooting for me and telling me that I could be somebody, all those things wouldn't have happened if there wasn't a God.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I think, you know, he meets us where we are, no matter where that may be. And you're a perfect example of that. So thank you so much for both of you for sharing. I want to change the directions a little bit here. And I want to explore a little bit less known topic. And that's, I want to talk about post-traumatic growth and what that means and what that is. So I am going to go ahead and throw that back to Dr. Isabel.
So post-traumatic growth is something that is not talked about as much, but it is a very important part of the aftermath of trauma, right? Because it can also be a positive. And so it speaks to the resilience and to the growth that comes after a traumatic event. Once the individual is able to learn positive coping mechanisms and deal with that trauma and work through all of that. But I think that we should also ask maybe Marcella and Jasmine about post-traumatic growth, because they're the real MVPs.
Marcella, tell us a little bit about what the journey to post-traumatic growth can look like.
What frequently happens is a patient will come to me and ask, "Doctor, can you make me forget what I've been through?" My answer is no, I can't make you forget, but I can give you something a lot better. I can help you change your perspective. I can help you change the way you see yourself, you see your past, and you see the world. And that will give you more tools, more strength to become a more resilient person, to become an instrument that will help many others. You will be able at some point, I promise, if you do your work with a therapist, with a community, with a support group, you will find this strength within you, and you will see all the answers that right now seem so difficult, if not impossible, to find. But this experience has a purpose, like Isabel said a few times, and your job is to find out what it is. Like, think of what we are living now, this pandemic. We're all struggling. I don't think there's a single person in the world that isn't struggling right now. But so many of us have been able to find the silver linings. Every day I hear testimonies and heartwarming stories of things that got changed for the better. And the same thing applies to sexual trauma, to domestic violence, to sex trafficking, to all traumatic experiences.
Jasmine, when are you most likely to see post-traumatic growth in a trauma victim?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so I would say, we start from a place of acknowledging that a client's responses to the impact of trauma are adaptive. And so if we assume that, we kind of understand that there are some strengths that we can build on that lead to a place of self-efficacy, where clients start to believe that they are capable of achieving their goals, that they are worthy of having the things in their life that they are dreaming about. They get to a place where dreams are even, dreaming is something that happens. And, what I start to see is, kind of increased stability and predictability in the daily routine, just clients feeling a greater sense of power and control over their own lives. They've gotten a chance to reclaim that, which is definitely rewarding to see. Also kind of increased bonding with family and community, which we've spoken a lot about. People just having a larger capacity to be in relationship. I think that's something that we don't talk enough about, is we get a lot from being in community, but as an introverted extrovert, sometimes being with other people can pull a lot from us. So when you start to develop those internalized sense of strengths and feel like you've got something to give, your relationships feel a little bit more balanced, and so it's easier to expand your network. And so that's something that I start to see. And then also, going through a traumatic stress situation gives somebody an incredible capacity for empathy. And oftentimes you see people start to redirect that in ways that end up feeling like a newfound purpose and mission. And as we've heard Melinda and Christine talk about, that really kind of changed the meaning and the narrative of how they see their trauma story.
I love that point you just brought up, that sometimes we walk through hard things so that we can help others get to the other side as well. And I love that. And Melinda, I have a question for you. In what ways have you experienced post-traumatic growth, and how did Salt and Light help you get there?
So when I first heard about post-traumatic growth, I'm like, oh my God, I must qualify for this topic. When I just by hearing it, right? So I did a lot of research about it, and it was very informative. Okay. So for my post-traumatic growth process, I had to go through a difficult emotional process, right? And when I did, I found like a higher level of happiness than I ever felt before. Like, I know that God is with me and I know what I'm supposed to do. I was on a mission, right? I wanted to save everybody. I wanted to put on a cape and save everybody and do whatever I had to do to try to reach out and use my compassion and my empathy and be obedient to my calling, because I felt like, man, God has me on this assignment, right? And of a service work, especially being a member and being in the fellowship. That's something that I condition myself to keep on doing. I mean, I value relationships more, right? I don't take them for granted. My challenges that I've gone through have given me like a deeper inner wisdom. I have more gratitude. And I can use my experiences that I've been through, because I work with women right now. I work with women whom I love. I love all my ladies. I love their families, their kids, and I feel like I have a story to tell. And because Salt and Light helped give me my voice and help me figure out what it is I really wanted to do with my life, I haven't been quiet since at all. I have not shut up since getting into the program.
And we don't want you to. We want you to keep going and keep voicing your opinion and everything. It's been so helpful. And I've been around Salt and Light just long enough to know that we call you guys thrivers. You're not just survivors, you're thrivers. And it is just contagious when we are around you. So I just want to thank you for your energy and your positivity, Melinda. And Christine, I have the same question for you. What were some ways that Salt and Light helped you experience your post-traumatic growth?
I think one of the biggest ways is that I stopped looking at my trauma as a character defect and something I did wrong, and I started to build confidence based on the fact that I survived that trauma. And that was a huge transition in mindset for me. Oh, my son just woke up. So, yeah, I began to look at life rather than just responding or reacting to things that happen. I began responding to them, and I began looking at life as a series of goals that needed to be reached and steps that I needed to take there. So what I needed to do to get there. Everything from just getting ready for work in the morning to, complex goals. I'm graduating from college this year with a degree in business economics. I mean, I've been at my job for going on 2 years now, and I've already been promoted. And I mean, the mentality that I got as a result of the confidence that I built, going to work with a hangover is simple after you've had to wake up the morning after being raped and act like nothing happened because you have to survive. So the strength that I developed, the grit, the resilience, the determination, there's so many skills that we build after going through trauma that we don't even realize until Salt and Light points it out. Until we have this spiritual transition and this spiritual, I don't even know how to describe it, but something happens spiritually where you start to look at your what you used to be consider a fault as a quality. We can focus under pressure. We have to survive, right? We don't panic. When some things that might get people, we might get a little frazzled sometimes, but we're able to focus in the worst of circumstances. We value loyalty more than most people because it's not easy to find. and it evaded us for so long. And I think one of the things that I like the most about myself is that I feel this overwhelming sense of appreciation for the people who have helped me. And it's given me a purpose. You know, it makes me just want to go out and do the same thing for other women who are where I was when I started this journey, so that they could feel the same thing I'm feeling now. I know for a fact that this model works, because in the 3 years that I've been around Salt and Light, we have a whole tribe of women who have, you know, become successful. And, you know, we did an alumni meeting. We had to rent out a whole room at Dave & Buster's, and half of the women weren't even there. So we have a whole tribe, you know, of people. So I think it just changed us in every way.
Melinda and Christine, from some of the questions I'm getting in, and by the way, if you are an attendee, go ahead and start sending your questions through. We have about 10 minutes left, so I want to make sure that we get to some of those. So go ahead and type them in the Q&A at the bottom of your screen. But Melinda and Christine, while we're receiving some of these questions, what would be one piece of advice that you would give to somebody who's listening, who may be interested in becoming part of the Salt and Light family and go through the program?
I'll go
Start
first.
with Melinda. Yeah.
Okay. My advice to them, now I send ladies, I love sending ladies to Isabel because I know that it works, and I want these ladies to get the same things that God gave me. It would be to trust the process and look at the evidence. The evidence and, you know, the women who've been in this program speaks for itself. And I know that the transition isn't going to always be easy, but you have a significant amount of people to be there to help you through that, and be there for you I want to say for the rest of my life. I hope Isabel's going to be here with me for the rest of my days, and to trust the process.
And what about you, Christine? What would your one piece of advice be?
You got to believe in yourself, and you have to accept that there's someone greater than you who's rooting for you.
That's really good. All right, so here we go with some questions. And before we get started on this part, I have told everyone on my panel that if they may not be comfortable answering a question, they will let me know. So don't take offense. We're just going to go through with this and get some answers. But the first question that I want to ask, I'm going to send this to Marcella. What advice do you have for people who are struggling with trauma, and maybe not be the trauma that we talked about specifically here, but trauma in general?
I would say once we identify that that's what's going on, own it. It's okay to have this type of reaction to a major negative event. I would be concerned if after going through all the things you've gone through, you didn't feel bothered. You didn't let any of that affect your life, your relationships. So normalizing your reaction is a very important step into your recovery. Respect your limits, respect your boundaries, set your boundaries and respect them. Don't let anyone interfere with them. Sometimes you need to take a more gradual course. You need to take things very, very slowly. There is a form of psychotherapy called a progressive muscle relaxation that can be helpful. Gradual exposure can be helpful, and combine different treatment modalities like we've mentioned before: psychotherapy, physical exercises, a healthy diet, good sleep, your community. There is so much power in a community. Reconnect with old friends, make new ones, go back to old hobbies, develop new ones. The power of religion, of spirituality, of a higher power. If you think about the 12-step programs, for example, AA and NA, the ones that help the most effective ones, all have a higher power. It's not a coincidence. Yoga, there's tons of research with yoga in trauma, and you guys know this way better than I do. I don't need to talk about it. So it's multifactorial. It's a combination. It takes a lot of work. It's not easy, but it's certainly possible.
Thank you for that. I have a question that I'm reading here, and it says, "Does Salt and Light only only help women who have been trafficked, or can women who have suffered other types of trauma enter your program? And there's also a question that talks about dealing with a family member assaulter, how they handle that and how they deal with that. So is there anybody who on the panel who would like to address that question? Raise your hand. Okay, go ahead, Melinda.
It says here that the assaulter, you have to see them on most holidays, and you have a hard time being touched or hugged by people due to molestation from the family member. My suggestion to you would be to remove yourself from any further circumstances and situations where you would ever have to see this individual again, because you are continuously re-traumatizing yourself over and over. So any little bit of work that you do, it says that you've spoken with a therapist, any little bit of work that you do to try to get through what's happened to you, you're being re-traumatized and put back into that situation all over again. If it's possible for your own safety and your own good, it would be to remove yourself from any further contact with this individual.
Sorry, no, I fully agree. She's experiencing the trauma over and over again. Maybe eventually one day, who knows, you will be in a position where you can say, that's fine, I can handle it. But that's not the case right now. You have to work on those other fronts before you're able to face that individual again.
We have two questions that revolve around how do thrivers find out about Salt and Light? And then the second question was, how do you find the women who need help and how do they find you? Isabel.
Yeah, so Salt and Light Coalition is not a first responder, but we have partnerships in the community who are. So once a woman, a potential client, has certain things that we are looking for. So for example, 6 months sobriety, an interest in health and wellness, they have found their housing, then that's when they get connected to us and they go through an interview process. And we see if it's a good fit for Salt and Light, or they're referred to us by our community partners.
I have a question here from Linda. It says, what has been the impact of telling your story? There can be a lot of negative effects or negative responses to telling your story that are rarely mentioned. Have you experienced any of them? What keeps you motivated to tell your story? Let's start with Melinda.
Oh my God, I could go on forever, but I know you only have a few minutes. So I was just talking with this about somebody. I had a newfound freedom when I started telling my truth, right? It helped be proven to be so much easier to get through it. And once I started sharing about it, I wasn't ashamed anymore, right? Every little bit of shame that I had, the more I told people what happened to me and what I had been through, it got a little bit better, right? I got to a place where I wasn't ashamed anymore. You know, I didn't need to feel guilty and ashamed. I needed answers, right? So I talked to whoever I could who would listen to me about what I've been through. Yeah, I've had judgment, of course. Everybody judges, but the benefits outweigh the judgment in my eyes.
And I think Brene Brown talks about this a little bit. And basically you take power back over the things that shame you, right? And you can use that story to like empower others. And that's what Melinda is doing. That's what Christine is doing. And it's just a beautiful thing to see.
I absolutely agree. I can't think of one negative consequence that's come from telling my story. Quite the opposite, actually. You have people come to you afterwards in tears. I was at a church service the other day where I shared my story, and literally this whole huge group of people came to me afterwards and thanked me. And a couple people told me I inspired them to go and change their lives. So it's extremely rewarding. If you have some people out there who want to take your baggage and carry it around, let them go ahead.
Absolutely. I'm going to end with a positive comment, and this is from Donna, and she says, Christine and Melinda, your grit, vulnerability, and courage is praiseworthy. You're a light to all who have experienced trauma and pain. Your passion is contagious. Thank you for sharing. Empowerment like this is truly life-giving, and I could not agree more. I just want to encourage anybody watching and of panelists to continue to share and to continue to thrive. And people like at Salt and Light care, and they want to continue to help you. And I just want to thank the panelists and Melinda and Christine for joining tonight and being so vulnerable, and Marcella and Jasmine, and of course, Isabel. I'm always in such awe of everything you all are doing. And I just want to, unfortunately, it's time's up. We're closing out, and I just want to make a few announcements. If you want to get involved with Salt and Light by volunteering or by offering internships or by donation, you can find all of that information at saltandlightcoalition.com, the website. I think we're going to pop that up on the screen here. Also, we have a virtual event that's really exciting tonight and tomorrow. If you go to kendrascott.com and you purchase any piece of jewelry, you know Mother's Day is right around the corner. 20% of that will go to Salt and Light. So we're really excited about that. But don't forget, when you are checking out, you have to put Give Back 6848 in the codes.
And please choose us as your charity for Amazon Smile. Everybody's buying from Amazon now, getting it delivered in Prime. So if you go to smile.amazon.com, we can get a small percentage of your purchase donated by Amazon. So that'd be awesome.
That's amazing. And finally, we want to invite you back next week. We are going to do the same thing, the same time, same place at 7 p.m. And it's going to be our third session. And that's going to be addressing nutrition and its effects on the body, mentally and physically. And that's super important. I think I'm so excited for that one as well. And that would be May 1st at 7 p.m.
And some amazing panelists. So it's Melinda Ring from Northwestern Memorial Hospital. She is a holistic MD. Jessica Doggart is a RD, a registered dietitian who works with how diet can influence your brain for you to have a limitless brain. And then we'll have some thrivers talk about how nutrition kind of impacted their mental health as well.
All right. Thank you so much again. And like I said, you know, there are so many ways that you can give back to Salt and Light, and go ahead and visit their website, scroll around. I don't know, I'm always so inspired for all of these events, and we just ask that you keep supporting us and keep coming back, and we will see you next week. Thank you so much, everybody. Bye.